Good morning, everyone. Thank you for that welcome. I am delighted to join you for this great conference. You've got a meaty, exciting agenda over the next 2 days, and you've got record attendance to boot, so congratulations to everyone. And I've already learned a lot about your local and regional initiatives as well, so this is great. This morning, I am tweaking the name of your energy theme to Energy That Matters Most. And you know, we've known for a long time that clean energy would be inevitable based on the economic and social and environmental drivers. The real question was how quickly could we make it the default in order to maximize benefits? Well, that question of timing has never been so important. So what I'm suggesting this morning is that we actually deliberately mimic the very challenges that we're trying to tackle. Because on almost every front, they are accelerating, they are scaling up, and they are beginning to mesh together in ways that create these positive spin-off loops that adds further to the momentum. In essence, it comes down to this: how do we accelerate and get speed and scale in synergy in our own work, wherever that finds us, in government or in the private sector, in NGOs? And often what I find is it comes down to how we exploit or leverage three kinds of opportunities. First, how do we leverage constraints? Next, how do we leverage hard versus soft technology? And three, how do we actually leverage the market itself? So let's begin with the leveraging of constraints. You know, I think one of my greatest joys in serving in the Clinton administration was getting to work with those exciting new technologies and the people developing them. The sulfur bulb, for example, and at this point I was going to hold up a little wand with a bubble like this, and then I thought about how that might go through security at the airport, and I decided to leave it at home. But it was a prototype for a hyper-efficient light product that used molecules of sulfur and argon gas in a small bulb that would be excited by microwave energy and then amplified by highly reflective materials in a light tube. And we were showing it, demonstrating it at this kickoff event late one summer afternoon at the entrance to the Forrestal Building in Washington, D.C. An event, I might say, with even more fanfare than usual, because there were a lot of media there were cameras rolling, and there was a drummer at my side who was doing the slow drum roll as we turned off 240 high-intensity lights that were underneath the canopy of the driveway and the entrance to the building. And then at this magic moment, I said something like, "And let there be light." And there was. You probably thought I was going to say nothing happened, which was exactly what my fear was. But when that dazzling beam of light shot out through that light tube the length of a football field, the crowd literally erupted in applause and cheers, and I was right there with them, partly out of relief, but partly because of the thrill of the moment. It was fabulous to get that kind of media attention for these kinds of technologies that we knew would usher in this new energy revolution and economy. And fabulous also because, frankly, the bulk of our programs and technologies were not quite that dazzling, didn't have quite that gee whiz factor, very significant. Even the regulatory programs, the building codes, and the appliance standards that are the key of any good energy policy. But most of the programs are really aimed at chinking away at all of those market barriers that get in the way of progress. You know, since then, I'm glad to say that a number of the barriers that we were dealing with, and perhaps you as well, are mainly relics of the past, like the idea that efficiency is all about deprivation, right? Or that solar and wind will never amount to anything more than a niche market. There's the other one, too, that I heard a lot from people on the Hill, and that is, if there were money to be made at efficiency, profit-maximizing firms would already be doing it. Which reminds me of that old economist joke. two economists walking down the street, and the young economist points to the sidewalk and said, "Look, there's a $5 bill." And the older, more experienced economist says, "Nonsense. If there were a $5 bill, someone would have picked it up by now." Well, there's a lot of $5 bills because of the other barriers that are still with us. And you know them well, probably better than I do. Split incentives, first cost hurdles, tax codes that can reward inefficiency, energy prices that don't reflect full costs, start and stop government programs that can chill private investment, streams of financing, human behavior, the list goes on. Despite all those barriers, clean energy is a huge success story. You know, in much of North America and Europe, if we were still using 1970s era technology in terms of efficiency, we would need 2 to 3 times the power generation that we need today. Or another way of putting it, what's the single biggest source of energy supply since the 1970s? It's energy efficiency by far. More than coal, more than natural gas, more than nuclear, more than a couple of them combined. So a huge success. But here's the thing, context matters. And so it was really eye-catching to read the 2012 International Energy Agency report that said that despite all that we have accomplished, all of the plans that we have on the drawing board, that still 2/3 of efficiency is going untapped. By itself, that would be worrisome, but when you put it in the context of other trends, it's more than that. So let me just go through the numbers quickly. On the demand side, we have population, of course. You know, I think 1960, most of us would remember it because a lot of you people remembered Wipeout. Me too. There were 3 billion people on Earth. Last year, we passed 7 billion. In 12 years, we'll hit 8 billion. Most of those 8 billion are going to be living in cities because the world is urbanizing more and more and becoming more prosperous, which is generally a good thing. The McKinsey report came out recently that said that the largest 600 cities have 20% of the world's population but generate 50% of the world's GDP. That's about $34 trillion. In 12 years, 2025, world GDP is going to double to about 65 trillion, and those 600 cities will contribute 65%. Bottom line is that we have about 3 billion new people entering the consumer class in the very near future. So how about the supply side? How are we going to meet that need? Long story short here is that most of the natural ecosystems that provide the ingredients of life, water, air, food, materials, a habitable climate, nearly all of them are in decline, some of them precipitously so. Climate change being of most significance because of the spin-off effects on so many other ecosystems and because it's so long-lasting. A couple of months ago, Sir Robert Stern, you may remember him, the British economist who was lead economist for the World Bank and issued that really influential report in 2006 on the economics of climate change. He was asked by the International Monetary Fund, IMF, "What have we learned since your report came out?" And he said, "In every case, we underestimated the pace of change and the impact of those feedback loops." It's all about speed and scale and synergy. And this simple graph kind of tells the story in a very simple way. On the consumption side, we have population, incomes, and consumption increasing at the same time that the capacity from ecosystems to meet those needs going down, which forces us into a narrow funnel with more cost and more risk, fewer options. You know, normally, and especially on a Monday morning at the start of your conference, that kind of quick reality check can either debilitate you or spur you to action, and I have to admit that I went through a pretty cynical period myself. But I came out on the other side because of this. Put better than anyone else, Albert Einstein, of course, once we accept our limits, we can go beyond them. And that's exactly what we find happening today. You know, we see it in the kinds of bold initiatives in the private and the public sector. Ray Anderson and Interface on your agenda today as being a standout example of one of them. The Carbon War Room with Richard Branson at the head of that. The ARPA-E program at the U.S. Department of Energy is doing a bang-up job accelerating technology development. The Living Building Challenge in the building environment that goes even far beyond LEED Platinum by identifying a whole set of mandates that would define sustainability. In the case of energy, a building would have to be powered only by on-site renewable energy, which puts a lot of burden also on the energy efficiency. The textile industry, in an unprecedented collaborative, sharing IP and patents in order to accelerate the ability to get toxics and waste out of the whole textile industry around the world. So much innovation, in fact, that we're going beyond efficiency per se and less into whole concepts of abundance and resilience, of regeneration, of adding value back to ecosystems. And, you know, frankly, if it weren't for that dire prognosis on climate change and the economic recession, we wouldn't be finding the World Bank or the World Economic Forum or the IMF all naming green growth as the only viable path forward and naming clean energy and efficiency at the heart of it. You may have heard a quote from President Obama's former chief of staff, who's the mayor of Chicago now. He was referring to the economic recession and said, "It was a crisis too important to waste." Well said, and I think that is exactly the sentiment that we can have in applying it to energy. So, how do we best exploit these constraints? Is it hard or soft technology? And by soft technology, I mean, you know, all the social and economic factors that go into shaping our use of technology, human behavior, essentially. And I suspect you know that I'm going to say both, and that is exactly right. But even this techno enthusiast believes that one of the most exciting trends that we've seen recently is this unprecedented emphasis on human behavior. Mine started about 6 years ago at a conference on the science of climate change, and one of the speakers happened to note that less than 1/2% of all the federal R&D on climate was based on social sciences. And so the light went off, and I thought, well, no wonder we've had such difficulty learning how to explain this science. Oh, that shouldn't have gone forward, never mind. Explaining the science of climate change, or learning how to convey the benefits of taking action and the risks in ways that people value and understand. So it's terrific to see this emphasis, even on your agenda, a number of good sessions dealing with the human occupant and human behavior, the psychology, or to hear facility managers really sharing ideas on overcoming the single biggest obstacle to energy use in buildings, and that's the human occupant. And this is only underscored, of course, by the emphasis on zero energy buildings, where the human factor can be accountable for about 50% of the remaining load. It's revealing, I think, also to see how behavior is playing out in other fields. Take medicine. In 2008, Dr. Peter Pronovost, who's now with Johns Hopkins, was awarded a MacArthur Genius Award and featured on Time magazine as one of the most influential people on the planet. Why? Because he found a way to dramatically cut catheter-related bloodstream infections in ICUs, critical units. And this is a serious kind of infection. It's a big problem. In the United States, it causes 17,000 deaths a year. This is infections that you get in hospitals. What was his innovation? It wasn't technology. It was a simple 5-point checklist that consisted of washing hands, having sanitized bandages and covers for patients, sanitized clothing for the medical staff. None of these concepts were new. So much had been written about this for years. But his genius came in taking all of that information and identifying the 5 most important things, and then putting it in a way that would be replicable and usable. His genius was designing for human behavior. Now, you would think that hospitals all across the country would leap at adopting that, but not so much, not so fast. And some follow-up research found why. Human factors again. Nurses didn't feel empowered to challenge doctors. Doctors felt that perhaps checklists were fine for pilots before taking off, but not necessarily useful for them. And it really took a lot of things to come together, including increased transparency in hospitals and some toolkits that were devised to make change happen, that it took off. So if ever we would underestimate the importance of human behavior in the energy field, boy, you just look at medicine and it would cure you, where so many lives are literally on the line each and every day. Even in the specific case of checklists, by the way, it was shortly after reading about Dr. Pronovost that I saw my first article by 2 psychologists explaining why those lists of 50 things you can do to cut energy use or 1,000 ways that you can save the planet, why they just don't work with human beings because of the way our mind works. That is far more important than to isolate a few of the most important and maybe sort them by cost or easiness to do. I credit a lot of this new focus on design thinking to a firm called IDEO. Maybe you've heard of it. Creator of the first mousetop for Steve Jobs, Apple, and so many other products. And more recently, for extending their kind of design thinking to public and private sector use of services, including designing of sanitary water delivery systems in poor developing countries. IDEO's CDO identified 4 tenets of design thinking that have great implication for us in looking at speed, scale, and scope. First and foremost, putting people first by identifying and observing what they need and want, even if they can't articulate it. And many of the IDEO projects start with teams going on the ground, just watching, just seeing what people do and what they have trouble with, and often leading them to strategies that they wouldn't have discovered otherwise. The second one, and this will sound familiar, is embracing constraints as a source of creativity. Third, seeding platforms for change, thinking through all the levers that are needed to bring a plan to results, all those steps in between, the theme of your conference this year. And often, as we know in energy, that really amounts to a lot more than energy or information only. I was thinking of a great example with the British chef Jamie Oliver, who you may have heard came to the United States recently, to some controversy, I might add, to see how he could improve the food being served in a number of schools, much to the opposition of some school boards, some of the kids, and some of the school cooks, who were worried about having to make all these changes, who were worried about cost, and wanted to give kids the food they wanted. Chicken nuggets being a prime example. And so Jamie Oliver decided that he would take it right to the root of the problem, and he got about a dozen grade school kids in a room, and he showed them how many conventional nuggets are made, not all. He took all those leftover parts of chicken that we do not normally see and we don't want to see, and he ground them up into this really awful, yucky-looking paste. And you can imagine the kids are just groaning, covering their eyes, and making all kinds of sounds, totally repulsed by it. And then he said, "So who wants chicken nuggets for lunch?" And they all raised their hands. It takes more than information sometimes. It takes whole platforms for change. And then finally, IDEO recommends to let your ideas go into the world to propagate change. And they're doing that themselves. You can download their own toolkit. You can go to their website for an openideo.org, where a lot of people around the world are collaborating and sharing ideas on change. I mentioned Nike and the textile factory. The reason why they decided to share patents and intellectual property, and a number of other companies too, is because they looked at the whole ecosystem of change around the world that they would need to address the getting waste and energy and toxics out of the stream. They couldn't do it alone. They really had to work with others, and they wanted to do it with others, and it's really quite a success so far. That's why I love the C40 Cities program that is on your agenda as well, all about creating a platform or sharing the best ideas and getting it out there in areas that need it the most. So which is more important, hard or soft technology? Both, of course. But the new thing really is integrating the two so that we design smart technologies for human behavior. Now, the third leverage, and that is how do we leverage all this through the market? Because we're always talking about the power of the markets, right? But anyone that's taken Microeconomics 101 knows that the two prerequisites of a well-functioning market are complete price and information signals. Signals that are generally woefully lacking in the energy field. And so yes, we've come a long way, but imagine how much faster and further we could go if we had market forces at our back. Which brings me to my second and last economist joke. A physicist, I'm married to an economist, and he likes this joke as well, yeah. A physicist, engineer, and economist are stranded on a desert island with nothing but a crate of canned food. How many have heard this? Oh, good. So they start brainstorming on ways to get at the contents, and the physicist decides to direct the sun's rays through his glasses to burn the can open. Doesn't work. The engineer concocts a device that catapults rocks at the cans. No luck. Then the economist runs up and said, I've got it. Let's assume we have a can opener. Thank you. I do love that joke. So we can assume all we want about how the market works and how price signals work, but really we can't get at the speed and the scale and the synergy that we need for today's Congress unless we do a better job in getting those signals right. So what's happening? Well, on the information side, let me run through it quickly. We heard about the green button this morning. That's fantastic, great example. We know in Europe and on both sides of the Atlantic that there are increasing requirements to disclose energy use and to benchmark. So what we have been able to do in comparing the performance of cars and breakfast cereal for that matter, we're now going to have at our disposal for buildings and homes. There are a number of real estate listings, MLS listings of the states that can now be sorted according to energy and green building certifications, which is also leading to real estate agents developing new accreditations so that they can differentiate their green expertise in the market. We're having smartphone apps appearing all the day, the green button that we heard of. Empirical data are beginning to show in statistical quantified terms the measurable difference then between certified Energy Star and green buildings in terms of occupancy, rental rates, and a number of other things that go to the bottom line. And that information is beginning to modify traditional appraisal forms so that these values can be captured in the market. A whole system, ecosystem of information signals is triggering changes out there. It's just the kind of synergy that we've been hoping for. On the price side, it's a lot messier. We have, of course, a British Columbia carbon tax. We've got some cap and trade systems that are setting up in the states, the precursor to inevitable carbon markets. Some companies are not waiting for that regulation. Perhaps you heard that Microsoft instituted its own internal carbon tax last June to good effect. They're learning a lot from it. They wanted to get ahead of it, and they wanted to start building carbon signal into their own investment decisions. We're also seeing a lot of conventional finance tools being adapted for clean energy. Now, you heard this first. In the United States Congress, a bipartisan group is actually moving forward what is called a master limited partnership. that would allow renewable energy projects to be bundled together for preferential tax treatment, something the oil and gas industry has used for years. On the efficiency side, I don't know if you call it PACE. That's what we call it in the States, but it's using long-established municipal finance tools that have been used to finance billions of dollars of sidewalks and water and sewer projects, now using it for efficiency. So a municipality will issue low-interest bonds. A third party will install the energy efficiency, usually projects, or solar. The owner does not have to pay anything up front and pays it back through the property tax bills, or in the state of Oregon for the residential, on their utility bills. And then the investor earns a good return over a long period of time. So that's fantastic. The revenue streams are opening up. But let's go a little bit further and think, what would be the market potential if we could get pervasive, consistent price and information signals of all kind on all kinds of natural capital, energy, water, carbon, other ecosystem effects? What if we could have that embedded in our routine financial instruments? I'm talking about accounting, P&L statements, regulatory filings. Already that's beginning to happen. The SEC, Security Exchange Commission in the States, gave a warning about 2 years ago that companies, publicly shared companies, traded companies, need to start reporting that. It's very sketchy now. Some companies are doing it on their own, though. Puma may have been the first company to develop a full-out integrated P&L program with natural capital costs, which is already leading to some changes, like their surprising announcement to some that they are removing leather from their portfolio based on their new accounting of the costs associated with that. Now, it's important to say that we're not talking about environmental reporting per se or CSR reports. Today, more than 100 kinds of rating agencies are looking at companies, covering maybe 2,000 different kinds of indicators. So there's a lot out there, and of course, they're not talking to each other much. And that's why investors and companies are getting reporting fatigue. But investors are increasingly here and overseas beginning to demand more information on natural capital costs and integrate it into their normal financial instruments, making it accessible and easy to use. Trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars of investments are beginning to go that direction. And several initiatives are underway that will help speed that along. One I'm associated with is called SASB, Sustainable Accounting Standards Board, modeled after the Financial Accounting Standards Board. And what they are doing is developing key performance indicators for a subset, then, of environmental attributes that are of material interest to investors in making their financial investment decisions, and doing it for 80 different industrial sectors. They started with healthcare, they're now doing financial, and we'll move on. I think it could be, for lack of a better term, a game changer. It may sound a little abstract, but let me give you a sense of how important that could be. There's an Oakland, California-based group called Green Biz Group, and they put out an annual State of Green Business Trends that I highly commend. It's a very useful report. Well, this year they worked with Trucost, the same firm that worked with Puma, on environmental reporting, and identified the fact that over about 4,000 corporations around the world, capital costs, natural capital cost, amounted to maybe 5% of total costs, but 50% of net profits in 2011. In 2008, they were equal to all profits. In other words, if we included natural capital costs on the books, it would have wiped out overall profits. But of course, that wouldn't have happened, because if we had had those pervasive, complete price and information signals built into the market, the power of the market would have been unleashed, and they would have found ways to dramatically reduce them and to create many, many new opportunities as well. So, from accounting, and I hope this I wonder how I can get back my slides. There, thank you. Whatever genius is back there. So from accounting to economics, I'd like to close with a few examples that give me inspiration, as much as that sulfur bulb in the 90s, including this one, a federal building in my hometown of Portland, Oregon, 1974 building owned by the General Services Administration, which is the largest property manager in the country. This building did not age well. It was precast concrete, single pane windows, one of the worst energy hogs, they say, in their whole portfolio. The joists were failing, some of the walls were leaking like sieves. And so in 1996, they started developing a whole list of all the deficiencies of this building for renovation. And in 2003, they started the design work. In 2006, they had to put it on hold for lack of money. And then with the economic recession came the federal stimulus money for shovel-ready projects, and GSA jumped at it. But there was a catch. And that was they had to pare back their normal design and construction period from about 60 months to 34. That's a big difference. And usually when you speed things up, there's a cost premium associated with it. In this case, they had less money. They were $25 million short in about a $135 million project. And they wanted this building to be a high performer and to be as a prototype for testing some technologies too. So here we have 2013 and the opening of that federal building, and it is on time. It is on budget. It hit all their performance characteristics. It's 55 to 60% less energy using than the Oregon code, which is one of the strongest in the country. It uses 60% less water than a conventional building of its type too. One of the reasons, if you look back to that lid on top, it has 180 kilowatts of solar panels, but underneath it's a device for catching rainwater. We do happen to get quite a bit in Portland, Oregon. And it's a tank for about 130,000 gallons of water that will then be used for all of the grain water in the system for recycling. Lighting was a big factor here too. And when they replaced the conventional HVAC unit with very efficient radiant heating and cooling, it was a slimline system, so it turned out that they could increase the height of each floor by about a foot, which was bringing a lot more daylighting into the building, but it also increased heating load, and they didn't want to add to the chiller capacity. So what they did was to design some beautiful, sophisticated forms of shadings and louvers that are climate adaptable, and on the west side, where they need it the most, a beautiful recycled aluminum screen that emulates the vegetation that they were once thinking of putting on, but decided it would be far too costly to operate and maintain on a building of that size, and also emulates the rain. It's a beautiful, beautiful building. On time, on budget. Oh, and daylighting too. They've even carved out holes so that light would reach the basement floor. You know, it's performed on all levels, and I think part of it is due to certainly the technologies, but I think the innovation that everyone is talking about and that magazine articles are writing about, you could go to GSA to get some of them. The architectural firm, Sarah, also has a lot of information. A lot of the innovation that they're talking about are smart people and smart systems that came together to meet all of those constraints. Literally, the project leaders physically in the same room, an integrated multidisciplinary team to think through all of the challenges, all the things that they had to meet, instant on-site collaboration, and then using a sophisticated, more costly upfront BIM system, building information management system, so that every change that they made would instantly ripple through to avoid clashes, inconsistencies, changes that would need to be made on site. It all worked. And I think in this is a case, and this is why it inspires me, if it weren't for those harsh constraints, or if it wasn't for setting those high performance goals at the front end, then I doubt that they would have been able to come up with the creative solutions they found. Now, what if we could turn to 3.8 billion years of creativity in dealing with harsh physical constraints? It's the field of biomimicry. Maybe a number of you have heard of it, from the Greek words that mean mimicking life. Fast-growing area, fascinating area. A lot of patents are showing up under the name biomimicry, and it's feeding a lot. The HOK architectural firm, global firm, has trained hundreds of architects in this field. So let's look at just a couple of examples. The ordinary gecko that everyone's seen and we've marveled at, and even Aristotle wrote about it 2,000 years ago. How do they do it? Well, researchers have wanted to know. They've investigated, and they find layer upon layer upon layer of bristles and hairs that provide incredible amounts of surface area that can attach to a surface. And the researcher that gave me this photograph, he also discovered that that density of bristles creates a chemical attraction to the surface as well. So the outcome of this is any number of projects that are going to be developing adhesives that are strong, that can adhere to anything, that can withstand great forces, and then you can peel them off and reuse them. What can we learn from the beautiful lotus flower? Symbol of purity in many, many countries because it stays clean, even though it grows often in muddy, muddy areas. In this case, researchers found that the bumpy structure on the flower and the leaves provides a little surface, or a lot of surface area, so that water molecules cannot adhere to it. When water strikes it, it rolls right off, taking dirt with us. So a company called Stucode created a product called Lotusan, modeled directly on the lotus flower structure, and it's an external finish that repels water, dirt, and also repels mildew and mold. Think of the energy and water savings that you would have if you could apply this to surfaces all around the world. And then finally, what could we learn from the most ubiquitous shape in nature? It's the spiral. And it's a wonderful demonstration that air and water need not, in fact, rarely does, flow in a straight line for maximum efficiency. And so you have a company called Pax Scientific that has created a whole array of technologies, award-winning technologies in fans and pumps to take advantage of this directly from the spiral shape. And in fact, their centrifugal pump uses 20 to 40% less energy, 2/3 less sound, and the fish aren't harmed when they flow through it. So many more concepts like this. You can find many more at this great site called asknature.org, run by the group and with private sponsors, Biomimicry 3.8. It's an open source collaboration website. You just type in how does nature store energy or communicate information, you could get access to kinds of research projects that are going on. Well, I started this talk by suggesting that we deliberately mimic the challenges we're tackling by speed, scale, and synergy, embracing dire constraints not only as sources of creativity, but because, frankly, that compels us to action in a way that we human beings have difficulty doing otherwise, it appears, or designing whole platforms of change for human-oriented technology and services, aligning our market signals in virtually everything we do, whether internally through our own signals that we create without waiting for government, or encouraging our elected officials to create the infrastructure needed for a properly working market. So yes, we see a tremendous amount of innovation. It's exciting, it's exhilarating, and what's even more exciting for us in the energy field is that energy is often right at the heart of it. Energy matters, and the work that you are doing could never matter more. So thank you, and I wish you a wonderful 2 days of this great agenda. Thank you.